You can cover for the three of us tonight. Giant Apache girl to shy rancher. Eli Parker had always lived a quiet life. The Parker Ranch had been in his family for generations, a small stretch of land tucked away in the rolling hills of northern Arizona. The red soil and dry grass seemed endless during the summer months, and the sunsets painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, stretching far beyond what most people could imagine. Eli loved it all, even if it was lonely sometimes. He had learned from his parents how to care for the land, how to raise cattle, mend fences, and make sure everything ran smoothly. Since their passing, he had been left alone to manage the ranch, a responsibility he had accepted without complaint. The morning air was crisp as Eli walked through the paddocks, his boots kicking up dust that drifted lazily in the sunlight. His hands were strong from years of labor, his skin weathered and tanned from the relentless sun, but his movements were careful, almost delicate. He treated every piece of equipment as if it were part of his own body, checking each fence line for weak spots, examining the water troughs to make sure they were clean, and speaking softly to the cattle as he moved among them. Each animal recognized his presence. They knew him, trusted him, and in return he watched over them with a quiet sense of pride. Eli's days followed a steady rhythm. He rose before dawn, fed the cattle, checked the fields, and repaired whatever needed attention. Meals were simple, often eaten alone, usually bread and eggs or leftovers from the previous day. He read a little when he had free time, books about history, nature, or letters from distant relatives who sometimes wrote, though not often. The rhythm of his life suited him, though there were moments when silence felt heavier than usual and the empty house echoed too loudly around him. Despite his solitary nature, Eli was not unhappy. There was a peace in routine, a comfort in knowing exactly what each day would bring. Yet beneath that calm surface there was a quiet longing. He had never married, never found someone to share his life with, and the neighbors were too far away for frequent visits. Sometimes, when the wind whispered through the dry grass, he would imagine what it might be like to meet someone who understood the land as he did, someone who could see the beauty in the smallest things, like the way morning light reflected off a dew-covered fence or the soft lowing of a calf calling for its mother. One afternoon, as the sun reached its peak and cast harsh shadows across the dusty landscape, Eli was repairing a section of fencing near the edge of the property. Hammering the posts into place, he noticed movement in the distance. At first, he thought it was just the heat waves rising off the earth, distorting the shapes beyond the pasture. But then, as he squinted, he saw the unmistakable shapes of horses. There were 3 of them riding slowly toward the ranch, their figures growing clearer against the horizon. Eli paused, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. He was not expecting visitors. Most people in the area kept to their own lands, and strangers were rare. He watched as the group drew closer, noticing that the riders were not ordinary travelers. The tallest among them was a young woman, towering above her companions, with dark hair braided neatly down her back. Her posture was confident, almost commanding, and there was a strength in her presence that made Eli feel both intrigued and cautious. The other 2 were younger, perhaps her cousins, and they rode with a sense of urgency, glancing behind them as if worried about something Eli could not yet see. He set down his tools and walked closer, dust swirling around his boots. The young woman noticed him at the same time and slowed her horse. Their eyes met briefly, and Eli felt an unusual mix of curiosity and hesitation. There was something different about her, something that went beyond her height or her strong frame. Her eyes were sharp and aware, scanning the land as if she could read its secrets, and yet there was a warmth in her gaze that made Eli relax slightly. She nodded politely, though there was no time for formal greetings. Eli realized quickly that these travelers were not here for social visits. There was tension in their movements, a careful alertness that spoke of danger. They were guiding a small herd of cattle across the land, but the animals seemed restless, ears flicking, hooves stamping nervously on the dry ground. The young woman, whose name Ellie would later learn was Ayita, was doing her best to calm them, using soft words and firm hands to keep them moving in the right direction. Eli could see the strain on her face, the way she adjusted her weight in the saddle, urging the animals forward while keeping an eye on the horizon. Eli approached slowly, raising a hand in greeting. "Good afternoon," he called, his voice steady but careful. "Can I help you with something?" Ayita nodded, though her eyes never left the horizon. "We're just passing through," she said, her voice calm but carrying a hint of urgency. "We have to move the herd tonight before sunset. There are people we're trying to avoid." Eli's heart skipped a beat. He had heard rumors of cattle rustlers and bandits in the region, but he had never faced anything like this directly. He looked at the younger riders who seemed nervous, shifting uneasily in their saddles. He realized that these were not ordinary travelers. They were in trouble. And they had no one else to turn to. For a moment, Eli hesitated. He was a quiet man, cautious by nature, and the idea of involving himself in danger was daunting. But then he looked at Aita again, at the determination in her posture, the way she had kept her younger cousins calm despite the obvious threat behind them. There was a courage in her that stirred something in him, a recognition that he could not turn away. "I can help you," he said finally, his voice firmer now. "Bring the herd through my property. You can rest here tonight if you need to." Aita's eyes softened, and she gave a small, almost grateful smile. "Thank you," she said simply. "You don't know how much this means." Eli spent the next hour helping them move the herd into a secure section of the ranch. He showed them the fences, pointed out where the water troughs were, and made sure the animals had food. Aita and her cousins worked alongside him, though Eli noticed how quickly she took charge, directing every movement with precision and authority. It was clear she had experience, a deep understanding of cattle and the land that matched his own, and perhaps even exceeded it in some ways. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the ranch, Eli found himself observing Aita more closely. There was a presence about her that was impossible to ignore, a combination of strength, intelligence, and quiet determination. She spoke sparingly, but when she did, her words carried weight, guiding the younger riders and easing the tension in the herd. Eli felt a sense of admiration he had rarely experienced for anyone. The night began to settle around them, the air cooling rapidly as the sun disappeared behind the distant hills. Eli showed them a small cabin on the property where they could rest, making sure it was safe and comfortable. Aita thanked him again, her voice quieter now, tinged with relief. She and her cousins settled in, the younger ones exhausted from the day's ride. Eli watched them for a moment, feeling a sense of connection that surprised him. For the first time in a long while, Ellie realized that life could bring unexpected encounters, people who challenged the quiet routine he had always relied upon. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but as he looked at Aita and her cousins resting safely in the cabin, he felt a quiet resolve building inside him. He would protect them, not because he had to, but because he could, and because he understood, perhaps for the first time, that courage came in many forms, not just the bold, loud acts he had read about, but in the simple decision to stand up when it mattered most. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, Eli returned to the porch of his ranch house, sitting in the quiet of the evening. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, and the distant sounds of the cattle settling down filled the night. He thought about the day, about the strangers who had arrived and the strange twist of fate that had brought them to his land. For the first time, he felt that the world beyond his routine was not so distant, and that perhaps in helping others, he might discover more about himself than he ever had before. And somewhere in the night, he knew that this was only the beginning of a story far larger than the quiet life he had always known. The evening settled over the Parker Ranch like a soft blanket. The air cooled quickly after the heat of the day, carrying the faint scent of dried grass and earth. Inside the small cabin Eli had shown them, Aita and her two younger cousins moved quietly, checking the cattle they had brought through the fence. The animals were restless, shifting their weight, stamping hooves, and letting out low, anxious sounds. It was clear they had been on the move for a long time, and the stress of travel was taking its toll on both humans and animals alike. Eli watched from the doorway as Aita moved among the cattle with ease. She seemed completely at home with the animals, her hands firm yet gentle, her voice calm and steady as she guided the herd into place. Her cousins followed her lead, doing exactly what she instructed without hesitation. There was a natural authority about her, not loud or demanding, but firm enough that her words carried weight. Eli had never met anyone like her before, someone so strong, confident, and capable, yet still patient and caring. When she finally noticed him standing in the doorway, Aita straightened and approached. "Ally," she said softly, "thank you for letting us use your ranch. We know this is unusual. Most people wouldn't take in strangers, especially not in times like these." Eli shrugged, feeling his cheeks warm slightly. "It's not a problem," he said. "Your herd needed a safe place, and this is what I do. Take care of the land and the animals. I can't just stand by if I can help." Aita nodded, but there was a seriousness in her eyes that made Eli realize there was more to their visit than he had understood. "It's not just the herd," she said. "There are people after us, cattle rustlers, and they're dangerous. We need to move quickly before they catch up."
Ellie's heart sank.
He had always known of dangers in the area, rumors of thieves and bandits, but he had never faced them directly. He had spent his life in quiet routine, far from trouble. The idea of involving himself in such danger made him uneasy. But when he looked at Aita and her cousins, he could see the exhaustion and worry etched into their faces. They were counting on him even if they didn't say it out loud. "What do you need me to do?"
Eli asked, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest.
Aita's eyes met his, and for a moment there was silence between them. Then she spoke, clearly and firmly. "We need you to cover for us tonight. You can watch the ranch, make sure no one sneaks in, and help us protect the herd. We trust you to do it." He had not expected such a direct request. "Cover for you?" he repeated, unsure what that fully meant. Aita nodded. "Yes. There's no time to explain everything, but I know you can handle it. You're careful, patient, and you understand this land. That's why we came here. We had no one else we could trust." Eli felt a mixture of pride and fear. He had always considered himself cautious, even shy. He avoided confrontation, stayed out of other people's business, and rarely sought attention. Now, he was being asked to take responsibility, in a real danger, not for himself, but for others. His mind raced with doubts. What if he failed? What if something happened to them while he was in charge? But then he looked at Aita again, at her calm but determined expression. There was no hesitation in her eyes, no doubt about what she was asking. She believed in him, and for some reason that belief lit a spark of courage inside him that he had never felt before. "All right," he said finally, "I'll do it. I'll cover for you tonight." Aita's face softened, a small but genuine smile appearing. "Thank you, Eli," she said. "You don't know how much this means to us." With that settled, they began preparing for the night. Eli checked the fences, making sure the gates were secure and the perimeter of the ranch was protected. He moved quietly, thinking about how he could position himself to see anyone approaching from a distance. Aita instructed him on some precautions, suggesting areas where the herd could be corralled safely and where they could hide if necessary. As darkness fell, the ranch took on a new appearance. Shadows stretched across the fields, and the only sounds were the occasional lowing of a cow, the rustling of dry grass in the wind, and the distant call of an owl. The quiet, which had always been a comfort to Eli, now felt heavier. Each creak of a fence post, each snap of a twig made him tense with anticipation. Aita sat with her cousins inside the cabin, her hands resting lightly on their shoulders. She spoke softly to calm them, telling them stories of past journeys, of how their family had always relied on each other, and how courage was about standing firm even when fear was present. Her words had a soothing effect, not just on her cousins but on Eli as well. He realized that courage wasn't always loud or heroic in the way stories made it seem. Sometimes it was quiet and steadfast, measured and thoughtful. Hours passed, and the ranch settled into an uneasy stillness. Eli kept watch from the porch, scanning the dark horizon with a careful eye. His heart pounded in his chest every time he heard movement, but he reminded himself to stay calm. Aita's faith in him had given him strength, and he refused to let fear take control. At one point, Aita came out to check on him. "You're doing well," she said quietly. "Don't let the silence fool you. Danger could come at any moment, but I trust you." That's all we can ask of each other tonight. Eli nodded, feeling a strange mix of pride and anxiety. He had never been trusted like this before, and the weight of that trust made him more determined. He adjusted his position, making sure he could see every approach to the ranch, his hands resting near the tools he might need. He felt alert, alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. As the night deepened, they began to hear faint noises in the distance. Footsteps, the sound of hooves, perhaps the rustlers approaching. Eli's pulse quickened, but he stayed still, observing, listening, waiting for the right moment to act if needed. Ayata had taught him to stay calm under pressure, and he realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Throughout the night, Eli learned more about Ayata and her cousins. She was not only brave, but deeply wise, understanding people and situations quickly. Her younger cousins looked up to her with admiration and trust, knowing that she would protect them no matter what.
Eli felt a connection forming, not just through the shared danger, but through respect for her strength and the way she cared for others. By the time the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, the rustlers had not appeared.
The herd was safe, the ranch was secure, and Eli had proven to himself that he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. Ayata and her cousins gathered their things, preparing to continue their journey, but not before offering Eli a warm smile of gratitude. "You did well tonight," Ayata said softly. "You were calm, careful, and strong when it mattered. Remember that. Courage isn't always obvious, but you showed it tonight." Eli felt a warmth in his chest that he hadn't known before. He had stepped outside his comfort zone, faced a real challenge, and come through it. More importantly, he had earned the trust of people who depended on him, and that trust felt like a bridge to a world he had always kept at a distance. As Ayata and her cousins rode off into the early morning light, Eli watched them disappear over the hills. The silence of the ranch returned, but it no longer felt heavy. Instead, it felt full of possibility, of new beginnings, and of the knowledge that even a quiet, shy rancher could make a difference when he chose to act. Eli returned to his chores, but the night's events lingered in his mind. He thought about the courage it took to step into the unknown, about the value of trust and community, and about the surprising ways life could change when you opened yourself to others. The sun climbed higher, warming the fields, and Eli felt a quiet sense of pride and hope. He had faced fear and uncertainty, and he had discovered a strength within himself that he hadn't known existed. And for the first time in a long while, Eli felt that the world beyond his ranch was not so distant, and that there were connections waiting to be made, people who could change his life as much as he had changed theirs, all because of a single night of trust, courage, and determination. The night had grown deep and quiet over the Parker Ranch, but for Eli Parker it was anything but calm. The sun had long disappeared behind the distant hills, leaving only the pale light of the moon to guide his watch. The stars glittered cold and distant above him, and the wind whispered softly through the dry grass, carrying the faint scent of earth and sage. Despite the beauty of the night, Eli could feel tension coiling in his chest. Every shadow seemed to shift, every crack of a branch in the distance made him start, and every distant sound of the cattle stirred a heightened alert in his senses. He had never spent a night like this before. Life on the ranch had always been routine, predictable, but tonight, with Ayata and her cousins depending on him, the stakes were real. Eli had positioned himself on the porch of the small ranch house, giving him a clear view of the fields, the fences, and the road that led toward the property. His hands rested near the tools he had kept ready, an old rifle, a lantern, and a heavy stick, anything that might help him in a moment of need. Inside the cabin, Ayata was calm but watchful. She moved quietly among her younger cousins, checking on the herd, adjusting blankets, and speaking softly to reassure them. Eli watched her, amazed at how composed she remained. She seemed to carry an unspoken strength, the kind of courage that didn't boast or shout but simply existed, steady and unwavering. He had never seen anyone like her, and he found himself studying her movements, learning from her focus and determination. "You're doing well," Ayata said suddenly, stepping outside the cabin. Her voice was soft, but it carried in the quiet night. "Don't let the quiet fool you. Danger could be closer than you think, but I trust you, Eli. That's all we can ask of each other tonight, Eli nodded, his stomach tight with nerves. I'll stay alert, he said, his voice firmer than he felt. I won't let anything happen to you or the herd. Aita smiled faintly, a look of genuine relief in her eyes. That's all I needed to hear. We'll manage the rest together. For the next few hours, Eli remained vigilant. He scanned the horizon, noting every shadow and listening to every sound. The cattle shifted in their pens, occasionally letting out low calls, and the younger cousins whispered softly to each other as they slept. Every now and then, Eli would hear the faint rustling of leaves or the snap of a distant branch, and he would tense, hand ready on the rifle, heart hammering in his chest. He had to admit to himself that fear was present, but it was different from the fear he had felt before. This was a focused, purposeful fear, one that sharpened his senses and kept him alert. He had to protect not just the property or the animals, but people who trusted him completely. And that responsibility, strange as it was, made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. Aita returned to check on him periodically, offering small words of encouragement and advice. She suggested positions where he could see better, ways to listen for movement, and small adjustments to the fence to make it harder for anyone to sneak through. Eli followed her instructions carefully, grateful for her guidance. He began to realize that courage was not just about action. It was about preparation, awareness, and understanding what to do in difficult situations.
Hours passed slowly.
The moon rose higher in the sky, casting silver light across the fields. The ranch was silent, save for the soft sounds of the herd and the occasional night bird calling in the distance. Eli found himself slipping into a rhythm, moving quietly, listening intently, checking the fences and ensuring that the animals were settled. The silence, once oppressive, became a kind of companion. It sharpened his senses and allowed him to feel every movement around him. And then, as if on cue, he heard it, the faintest sound of hooves in the distance, carried by the cool night air. His heart skipped a beat. He froze, listening intently. There it was again, a soft but deliberate sound moving closer. Eli's mind raced. Could it be the rustlers Aita had warned him about? Or was it something else entirely? A stray animal, a wind-blown branch? He didn't know, and that uncertainty made his muscles tense. Aita appeared beside him in an instant, having noticed his alert stance. You hear that? She whispered. Eli nodded slowly. Yes, something's out there. She placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. Stay calm. Observe first, act second. Remember what I taught you. Together they moved quietly to a position where they could watch without being seen. Eli's pulse raced, but he forced himself to stay still, listening to the faint sounds of the approaching hooves. He could see shadows moving between the moonlit patches of grass, figures careful and deliberate, and he realized that the rustlers were closer than he had imagined. The next hour became a test of patience, courage, and skill. Eli stayed crouched, alert and silent, watching the figures move along the edge of the property. Aita whispered instructions, guiding him on when to adjust his position, when to focus on certain areas, and how to anticipate the rustlers' movements. It was like a dance of shadows and silence, each step measured, each breath held. Despite the tension, Eli felt a strange clarity. He had never worked so closely with someone, never trusted so fully, and never had to think so carefully about every movement. His mind sharpened, analyzing the terrain, the positions of the intruders, and the best way to protect the herd. And in that moment, he realized that courage was not an absence of fear. It was the ability to stay focused, to act wisely, and to protect others even when the danger was real and immediate. Aita moved among her cousins, whispering quietly and keeping them calm. Her presence was steady and reassuring, a counterpoint to the tension Eli felt. He admired her strength, her skill, and the way she commanded respect without raising her voice. She was a leader in every sense, and he felt honored to be trusted by someone so remarkable. The rustlers approached the fence line, and Eli felt his heart leap into his throat. He gripped his rifle, his knuckles white, but remembered Aita's words. Observe first, act second. He could see their movements clearly now, the way they were trying to find an opening, testing the boundaries of the ranch. Every instinct screamed at him to react immediately, but he stayed calm, analyzing their strategy and waiting for the right moment. Aita signaled him quietly, pointing to a weak spot in the fence that the rustlers were approaching. Eli understood immediately. He needed to block their path without alerting them too soon. He moved with careful precision, placing obstacles and adjusting the fencing in ways that would slow the intruders down. His heart pounded, but his movements were deliberate and controlled. The night stretched on, each moment thick with anticipation. Eli stayed alert, following every instruction from Aita, watching every movement and thinking ahead. He realized that this night was changing him, teaching him lessons about courage, responsibility, and trust that he had never learned in all his years on the ranch. He had faced fear and uncertainty, and he was discovering strengths he had never known existed within himself. When the first light of dawn began to break, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges, the rustlers had not breached the ranch. The herd was safe, and Eli had stayed vigilant through the night without faltering. Aita's guidance and confidence had been invaluable, but Eli knew that he had also relied on his own courage, his own careful observations, and his ability to stay calm under pressure. Aita approached him, her face showing relief and quiet admiration. "You did well tonight, Eli," she said. "You stayed calm, focused, and strong. That's not easy, especially for someone who has never faced danger like this before." Eli felt a warmth in his chest, a mix of pride, relief, and newfound confidence. He had stepped outside his comfort zone, faced a real threat, and come through it. More importantly, he had earned the trust of Aita and her cousins, and that trust felt like a bridge to a world he had never dared to enter. "You taught me a lot, too," he said quietly. "About courage, and about staying calm when it matters most." Aita smiled, a genuine soft expression that made Eli feel seen and understood. "Courage comes in many forms," she said. "It's not always the loud heroic acts people talk about. Sometimes it's quiet, careful, and steady. You showed that tonight." As the sun climbed higher, warming the ranch, Eli began to relax, feeling a sense of accomplishment that was both new and exhilarating. The night had tested him in ways he had never imagined, and he had discovered an inner strength that he had never known existed. He also realized that life could be unpredictable, bringing unexpected challenges that could reveal the best in people if they were willing to rise to the occasion. Aita and her cousins prepared to move again, but not before thanking Eli for his vigilance and courage. "We couldn't have done this without you," Aita said. "You protected us, and that means more than words can say." Eli nodded, feeling a quiet pride. He had learned that courage was not about being fearless, but about acting wisely and bravely when it mattered most. And as he watched them ride off toward the distant horizon, he knew that this night would remain with him forever, a reminder of the power of trust, courage, and quiet strength. The first light of dawn had barely touched the horizon when the tension that had built throughout the night finally came to a head. Eli Parker stood quietly at his post, scanning the distant hills and the dusty road that led to his ranch. The night's silence had been broken by the faint stirrings of movement, shadows that flickered just beyond the moonlit grass, and Eli's heart had begun to pound with the realization that the rustlers were close. Inside the cabin, Aita moved among her younger cousins with calm precision. She had spent the night guiding them through the long hours, keeping their fear at bay, and now it was time to act. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, scanned the horizon, calculating every angle, every possible approach the intruders could take. Eli watched her closely, feeling both awe and reassurance. If anyone could manage this dangerous situation, it was Aita. The rustlers appeared first as faint shapes in the distance, low to the ground, moving cautiously as if testing the boundaries of the ranch. Eli could see the glint of metal in their hands, pitchforks, ropes, and crude tools they might use to seize the herd. They were experienced, he realized, and likely believed they were coming to an easy target. But Eli and Aita had other plans. "Stay calm," Aita whispered as she approached him. Her hand rested lightly on his shoulder, steadying him. "We don't need to fight recklessly. We need to be smart. Watch them, wait for the right moment, and act together. That's how we protect the herd." Eli nodded, gripping the rifle he had prepared the night before. He remembered the lessons of the long hours, patience, observation, and staying calm even as fear crept into his chest. He had never faced a situation like this, yet something inside him had shifted. He knew he could do this, not because he was naturally brave, but because he understood responsibility and he had the guidance and trust of Aita. The rustlers came closer, testing the fences at the edge of the ranch. They moved with slow, deliberate steps, speaking in low tones, clearly confident they would catch the travelers unprepared. But Eli and Aita had anticipated their approach. Small obstacles had been placed in strategic spots, and Eli had made sure the fencing was secured to slow down any attempt to breach it. Every movement was calculated, every moment measured. Aita motioned quietly to Eli, pointing toward a narrow opening in the far field where the rustlers might try to sneak through. "They'll come here next," she said. "Be ready." Eli held his breath as the intruders approached. The tension in his chest was tight, but his mind was sharp. He remembered the cattle, the younger cousins, and Aita's trust. He could not fail. He took careful aim, positioning himself where he could see the rustlers without revealing his own presence. The rustlers paused at the opening, unsure of the terrain. It was the perfect moment. Aita stepped out from her hiding place and clapped her hands loudly, drawing their attention. The rustlers turned instinctively, their focus shifting just long enough for Eli to act. He stepped into a shadowed area, slamming a heavy piece of wood against a gate to create a loud noise. The rustlers jumped back, startled and off balance. Aita moved quickly, using the distraction to herd the younger cousins and the cattle into a safer corner of the field. Her voice was calm but commanding, giving directions with precision. "Move the calves first! Keep them quiet! Stay low!" she called. The cousins obeyed without hesitation, their trust in her absolute. Eli watched as the rustlers tried to recover from the sudden noise. They were disorganized now, unsure where the defenders were positioned. He realized that brute force was not necessary. Strategy and quick thinking would win the day. He threw a few loose boards across the rustler's path, tripping one of them and causing him to stumble. Another rustler shouted in frustration, and the momentary chaos gave Aita and her cousins more time to secure the herd. The next hour was a delicate battle of wits and timing. Eli stayed alert, moving carefully to block paths and prevent the rustlers from reaching the herd. Aita coordinated every step, her keen eyes anticipating the intruders' actions before they could even make them. The younger cousins followed instructions perfectly, staying calm under pressure and helping wherever they could. Eli felt a strange exhilaration amidst the tension. He had always thought of himself as shy and cautious, but now he was learning that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the ability to act thoughtfully in spite of it. Every decision he made, every movement he took, contributed to the safety of people who had trusted him completely. And with each passing moment, he felt his confidence grow. The rustlers, frustrated and confused, began to retreat toward the distant hills. They realized that the ranch was well defended, and their attempts to steal the herd had failed. Eli and Aita exchanged a quick glance, acknowledging the success of their strategy. But the danger was not over yet. They knew the rustlers could return, and the night's events had taught them that vigilance was essential. As the intruders disappeared from view, Aita approached Eli, her expression softening. "You did more than I expected," she said quietly. "You stayed calm, made the right moves, and protected the herd. That takes courage." Eli felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt before. "I couldn't have done it without you," he admitted. "Your guidance, your courage, it made all the difference." Aita smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her. "Courage comes in many forms," she said. "You showed it tonight, not with boldness or strength, but with careful thinking, patience, and determination. That is real courage." The younger cousins peeked out from behind her, their eyes wide with admiration for Eli. They had seen the way he had stayed calm and focused, and they trusted him completely. It was a moment of connection, a bond forged in a night of uncertainty and challenge. Eli realized then that the night had changed him. He had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, and he had come through stronger and more confident. The lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. The importance of trust, the value of preparation, and the power of quiet courage. By mid-morning, the ranch had returned to its peaceful state. The herd was calm, the fences were secure, and Ellie felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had protected the land, the animals, and the people who had come to trust him, and more importantly, he had discovered a side of himself he had never known, a side capable of courage, leadership, and decisive action. Aida gathered her cousins, preparing them to continue their journey. She turned to Ellie once more, her expression filled with gratitude. "We couldn't have done this without you," she said. "You stood strong when it mattered most. Remember that, Eli. Trust yourself. You have more strength than you know." Eli nodded, feeling a quiet pride. He watched as Aita and her cousins mounted their horses and rode off toward the distant hills, the morning sun casting long shadows behind them. For a moment he felt a pang of loneliness as their figures disappeared, but it was accompanied by a sense of fulfillment and growth. He had faced a true test of courage, and he had succeeded. As he returned to the ranch house, Eli reflected on the night's events. He had always thought of his quiet, predictable life as safe and sufficient, but he realized now that life could bring unexpected challenges, and with those challenges, opportunities to discover one's true strength. He had stepped outside his comfort zone, faced real danger, and learned that courage and trust could change everything. The ranch returned to its usual rhythm, but for Eli, nothing would ever be the same. He had proven to himself that he was capable of action, responsibility, and courage. And as he tended to the cattle, repaired fences, and prepared for the day ahead, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that Aita and her cousins would carry with them the memory of his help, just as he would carry the memory of their trust and courage. The night had forged a bond between them, a connection formed through danger, respect, and shared determination. And Eli Parker, the quiet rancher who had once lived a life of routine and solitude, had discovered that he could make a difference in ways he had never imagined. The sun rose higher, warming the fields and casting the ranch in a golden light. Eli smiled to himself, knowing that the world was full of unexpected challenges, but also full of opportunities to show courage and strength. And for the first time in a long while, he felt ready for whatever might come next, confident that he could face it with calm, careful determination. The morning after the confrontation was quiet on the Parker ranch, a calm that felt both soothing and strange to Eli Parker. The night's events had left him drained but alive in a way he hadn't experienced before. The early sunlight painted the fields in soft gold, making the dry grass glow and casting long, gentle shadows across the fences. The cattle moved slowly, grazing peacefully, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, the ranch felt truly serene. Eli walked among the pens, checking on the animals. Each calf, each cow seemed to acknowledge his presence, lowing softly as if to say, "All is well." But his mind was not on the animals alone. He thought of Aita and her younger cousins, wondering how far they had traveled since leaving the ranch and whether the rustlers would attempt to return. The events of the previous night had left a mark on him, a mixture of relief, pride, and a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, and had come through stronger than he had ever imagined. As he worked, he remembered the look in Aita's eyes, the calm determination that had guided her every move. She had trusted him, relied on him, and in doing so had shown him that courage came in many forms. It wasn't always about strength or loud heroics. Sometimes it was about being steady, thoughtful, and willing to act when it mattered most. Eli realized that he had discovered this courage within himself, and that realization filled him with a quiet, lasting pride. Later that morning, Eli prepared a small meal for himself, eating slowly as he reflected on the night's events. He thought about the younger cousins and how they had looked to him and Aita for guidance, and he realized that even small acts of protection and leadership could have a profound impact on others. Trust, he understood, was not given lightly. It had to be earned, and it carried with it a responsibility that was both humbling and empowering. As the sun rose higher, painting the ranch in warm light, Eli began to think about the future. He had always lived a quiet, solitary life, focused on routine and predictability, but the events of the past few days had shown him that life could bring unexpected challenges, and with those challenges, opportunities for growth, connection, and purpose. He realized that he was not as isolated as he had once believed. There were people like Aita and her cousins who could change his life simply by entering it, bringing lessons, trust, and even friendship. By midday, the ranch was fully bathed in sunlight, the cattle calm and the fences secure. Eli took a moment to sit on the porch of the ranch house, breathing in the warm air and letting his mind wander. He thought about Aida, imagining her riding confidently with her cousins across the hills, guiding them safely toward their next destination. He smiled at the memory of her quiet strength, her sharp mind, and her unwavering calm under pressure. She had been a guide, a leader, and a teacher without ever intending to be, and Ellie felt grateful for the lessons she had imparted. As he sat there, he noticed the horizon in the distance. For a moment, he imagined the rustlers returning, a shadow of the tension from the previous night flickering in his mind. But then he shook his head, realizing that the danger had passed, at least for now. He had protected the herd, the young cousins, and the ranch. He had acted with courage and thoughtfulness, and that was enough. The past night had been a test, and he had passed. Eli thought about how life had changed for him in such a short time. Just a few days ago, he had been a quiet, solitary man, living a predictable routine with no expectation of danger or challenge. Now he had faced real fear, made difficult decisions, and emerged with a new understanding of his own strength. He felt a sense of maturity, a quiet confidence that had been absent before, and he realized that he would carry this experience with him for the rest of his life. In the late afternoon, Ellie decided to visit the section of the ranch where he had helped Ayita and her cousins secure the herd. The pens were empty now, the cattle having returned to their usual routines, but the place felt different to him. It was no longer just a part of the ranch. It was a place where courage had been tested, where trust had been earned, and where bonds had been formed. Eli ran his hands along the fence, remembering every moment, every decision, and every careful action that had contributed to the success of the night. As he worked, he noticed a subtle shift in himself. He felt more connected to the land, more aware of the rhythms of life, and more attuned to the possibilities that existed beyond routine. He understood now that life was unpredictable, that challenges would come unannounced, but that he had the ability to face them with courage, patience, and careful thought. The events of the past night had expanded his understanding of himself, of trust, and of the strength found in quiet action. The evening came, and Eli prepared a small fire outside the ranch house. He sat quietly, watching the flames flicker and listening to the soft sounds of the cattle settling in for the night. He thought about Aita and her cousins, imagining their journey, and he felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond mere pride. It was a feeling of connection, of having made a meaningful difference in the lives of others, and of having discovered a new dimension of himself. Eli remembered the words Aida had spoken to him before leaving. Courage comes in many forms. You showed it tonight, not with boldness or strength, but with careful thinking, patience, and determination. That is real courage. He repeated the words quietly to himself, letting them sink in. They felt like a key, unlocking a part of him he had never fully recognized before. He understood now that true courage was not about being fearless. It was about being willing to act, to protect, and to stand firm when it mattered most. As night fell, Eli felt a sense of peace he had never known. The stars glittered above him, and the ranch was quiet and secure. He thought about the events of the past days, about the fear, the tension, the decisions, and the victories. And he realized that life was richer, fuller, and more meaningful because of these experiences. He had faced danger, acted with courage, and earned the trust of people who had come into his life unexpectedly. Eli knew that the bond he had formed with Aida and her cousins would endure. Even if they were far away, trust, he realized, was a powerful connection, stronger than distance or time. The night had created something lasting, a respect, a shared experience, and a recognition of courage in action. And Eli understood that these lessons would stay with him, guiding him through future challenges, shaping his decisions, and enriching his life. He reflected on how much he had grown in such a short time. The quiet rancher who had once lived in routine and solitude had been transformed. He had discovered strength, courage, and the importance of connection.
He had learned that helping others, protecting those who depended on him, and acting with care and thoughtfulness could create bonds and experiences far richer than any solitude could offer. As he finally retired for the night, Eli felt a sense of fulfillment.
The ranch was secure, the cattle were safe, and the memory of Aita and her cousins would remain as a reminder of what courage, trust, and careful action could achieve. He had stepped into a world of challenge and uncertainty, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident in his own abilities. The next morning, Eli woke early, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He tended to the ranch as he always had, but now with a deeper understanding of himself and the world around him. The events of the previous night had changed him. He carried with him the lessons of courage, patience, and trust, knowing that he could face challenges with calm determination. Though Aita and her cousins had moved on, their presence lingered in his mind. Their trust, their bravery, and their guidance had left a lasting mark.
Eli realized that life was full of unexpected encounters, and that the people who crossed his path could change him as much as he might change them. He felt grateful for the experience, for the opportunity to rise to the occasion, and for the quiet confidence that had grown inside him.
The ranch was peaceful, bathed in the warm light of the morning sun. Eli stood at the edge of the fields, looking out over the land that had been his home for so long. He smiled quietly to himself, feeling a sense of readiness for whatever life might bring next. He knew that he was capable of courage, of thoughtful action, and of protecting those who relied on him. And for the first time in a long while, he felt that he could face the world with confidence, strength, and a quiet sense of purpose. As the day began in earnest, Eli continued his work, tending to the fields, repairing fences, and caring for the cattle. The memory of the night's events stayed with him, a reminder of his own courage and the bonds he had formed. He had learned that life could bring unexpected challenges, but also unexpected connections and lessons, and he knew that the experience would stay with him forever, shaping who he was and who he would become. Eli Parker, the quiet rancher who had once lived a life of routine and solitude, had discovered courage, strength, and the power of trust. He had faced fear, protected those in need, and learned that even a quiet, careful person could make a meaningful difference. And as he looked out over his ranch, he felt a sense of peace, purpose, and readiness for whatever the future might hold.